And very good. All right. And with that, I will turn it over to Clint. Clint, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm super glad to be here. As Tim said, my name is Clint Davis. I'm with Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness. So we own a private practice counseling agency here in town in Shreveport, Bossier, and in Ruston. And I'm a certified sex addiction therapist and a trauma professional. I'll give you a little bit more detail about that. But I've been kind of going around the country and honestly the world in the last couple of years talking about pornography addiction, social media issues. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that in general today. We're going to talk a little bit about the origins of why we've gotten into the problem we've gotten into before kind of talking about what to do about it. I see there's really only 2 on here right now. So if you guys can give me a little bit of feedback about kind of where you're at, I'll try to gear the talk to what you guys do, if you wouldn't mind, if you don't mind. So Bianca, I'll ask you first, kind of what do you do and are you a team leader? Or are you here for yourself? If you don't mind saying.
I would say both, because I'm sorry, I'm trying to deal with the virtual background because let's be real, I'm sitting on the couch.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
I didn't want everyone to know that, but now you do. And I keep trying to turn my laptop so the lighting on my face matches the lighting in this picture. But anyway,
you're good.
I am a digital content specialist at LSU Shreveport. So I work in a lot of social media, but I'm also a testimony of your office's work.
Oh, nice.
And so I'm always interested to hear you speak. And I, a lot of times, unfortunately, have missed those opportunities. And I love professional development, especially when it has to do with mental health, because I'm definitely on board with breaking the stigma. I had the opportunity to work with our counseling services department and be on their new podcast. And so I really enjoy being a part of encouraging anyone really that sometimes, that counseling and mental health is just as important as any other part of your health. And so that's really my place of interest. That's probably more than you were asking for, but.
No, that's perfect. Thank you for the vulnerability and sharing. Michael, do you have any comment about kind of where you're at?
Michael, you're on mute. I guess not.
Okay. Amy, if you want to kind of chime in on while you're here, we can listen, or I can just keep going. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So some of the stats that I wanted to start with.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
I'm trying to get off mute myself. So I just feel like personally and professionally, I think it's a really wise approach. And I apologize. I hopped on just a couple minutes late. I looked up and I was like, oh dear. But I just think that it's one of those things that, I actually personally have a kindergartner. And so I think when you are, and I'm the executive director of a foundation. And so when you are completely consumed with, responsibilities of work at all different times, and then, you have phone calls that come in and some of them, quite frankly, can't wait. And so it automatically puts you kind of connected to that device that we'd like to all pitch out the window sometimes.
Absolutely.
And so, I want to set a good example for my child about limits and about boundaries and about being a healthy person to be fully present to where I am. And so I just think in all areas of our life, it gets way too convenient to just be a victim to other people and technology pushing you to maybe loosen those boundaries or loosen that structure. And so I appreciated that this opportunity was afforded to us to learn some great skills.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I talk about a lot are understanding that we have had an extreme shift in culture in just 10 years. And so one of the issues that we have is that the cell phone is unlike any other device in all of human history. It came into the world unlike anything, because the refrigerator, the microwave, the light bulb, these things that came into existence that, kind of infiltrated the workplace, infiltrated our families, they took 20 and 30 years to change the culture. If you take like the ice box, for example, we came up with the ice box and then we realized we could keep food cold, and that changed our interstate travel, that changed our trucking industry, that changed our ability to share different foods and different things across the country. But it took a long time and a lot of effort for it to slowly change. And for good and bad, we've seen how cheap food that can be traveled from state to state, right? It's helpful in the sense that it's cheap, but it's been terrible for our emotional and physical health. But the cell phone, we went one night from having zero access to apps, zero access to social media, zero access to pornography, to instant access. And that was somewhere around 2007 when the iPhone came out. And 2005, if you remember, Facebook came out, and if anybody remembers, you had to have a college ID. You had to have a .edu to be able to have Facebook. And somewhere around 2009, the second smartphone came out, and we handed that first smartphone to our children. And so we're in 2021. So we're about 11 years into, for the first time ever, kids having access to the phone, to devices. And the problem with that is that we didn't see we didn't see the consequences for what we were doing with the internet, with social media, with smartphones at work, at our homes at all, because we had never had them before. We didn't have 2 or 3 years to watch them kind of play in the culture, play in the system, and go, oh, this is problematic, we should change that. And even 10 years in, we're barely doing anything about it. And so my two biggest things I want to talk to today, and I'm going to lean more heavily on pornography than I am social media, because I think it's one of the most devastating things that's going on in our culture. And because of the device, it's not just affecting men, it's affecting women and families at an alarming rate. And you can find all of it on social media all the time. So I'm just going to give some workplace stats. 63% of adult men and 36% of adult women have looked at pornography at least one time while at work in the past 3 months. So you're looking at over half the men in the workplace and almost half the women in the workplace have looked at pornography in the last 3 months. 38% of adult men and 13% of adult women have looked at pornography more than once while at work in the last 3 months. So multiple times. Half of all workers, so 50% of all workers, have been exposed to sexually explicit material by coworkers. 28% have downloaded sexually explicit content from the web while on the job. And 70% of all internet porn traffic occurs between 9 and 5. Now, these stats were before COVID. So now we have work from home, we have Zoom, we're on our computers all the time, we're on our phones all the time doing work. And right behind that is this addictive level. Social media and pornography are both as addictive, if not more addictive, than cocaine. And so we all know this. If you've been walking to your car or into meeting and you hit that Facebook button or you hit that Instagram button, sometimes you catch yourself being like, why am I even looking at this? Like, I don't even have anything to go on here for. And yet here I am checking my email. Here I am touching Facebook. Here I am swiping. About a year and a half ago, I completely changed my life around social media because I was in bed one night and I'd been reading this book series for about literally since I was 15. And the 33rd book came out and I was so excited. I'd been reading it for a couple of nights and I was like, man, I'm going to finish this book. It's going to be great. I get in bed at like 8:15 with my wife and I'm ready to read. And I check something on my phone. And I look up and it's 9:30. I'm exhausted. And I was watching random jujitsu videos, random political videos. And I had been on for like an hour. And then I was too tired to read my book. And I just said, I talk about this all the time. And I wasn't even doing anything, quote unquote, unhealthy. But I wasted an hour of my time doing something that I didn't want to do and putting off something that was very important and that gave me a lot of happiness. And I see this time and time again, is that we have cavemen and women brains and we cannot compete against technology. We cannot compete against the algorithm, against the draw of social media and technology, especially at night, especially when we're overwhelmed and we have emotional problems. So I want us to think about that in our own lives and start to say, okay, how do I live differently? Do I need to put social media and Facebook, take it off my phone and only have it on my laptop and only go at a scheduled time to do business or to check on certain things or to communicate with family? And then the rest of the time, I don't need to be touching it. Because the problem is that we can't beat it. It doesn't matter how smart we are. It doesn't matter how healthy we are. We will lose to the dopamine drip that is our smartphone. Does that make sense? And so when you take that and you add that to pornography, especially, that's something that is all around us all the time, and it causes lots and lots of problems. And so I'm going to pull up the slides real quick. And I'm going to share my screen with you.
You should be able to hear. There you go. Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to go through this fast because we don't have time to go through all of it. You don't care who I am. You can look me up online if you want to. So here's why we're in trouble. Let me move y'all out of the way. Here we go. So that way you don't have to look at yourself the whole time either. So I'm seeing a huge increase. This was before COVID. So, I adapted some of this since COVID, but debilitating social anxiety in adults. We're seeing an extreme amount of casual sexual partners, an intense desensitization of violence and sexual violence, 20% increase in anxiety disorders. Our prefrontal cortexes, especially in our young adults, but even in our older adults, are not functioning, which means we're making more impulsive decisions. We're not capable of managing our emotions. We're being very overwhelmed easily. And we see this in teens and young adults, especially. Suicide rates are increased. We have seen a 200% increase in self-harm in teenagers and a 76% increase in suicide in teens in the last 10 years. And that is a shocking and very overwhelming statistic. Our gun violence has increased, our addiction has increased, divorce, financial debt, obesity. And I believe that a lot of these things have always been problematic, but now our margin for error and our ability to escape and numb out due to social media and pornography are at an extreme level. A few caveats. So I wanted to review this real quick. I did some talks at the YMCA, and I think as parents, man, I think as moms and dads, we need to know and understand that the root causes of, I think, social media and pornography addiction, which I think most of us have if we have a smartphone and haven't balanced it, is that we have a lot of trauma from our past. And so I did some talks to try to understand that we need to educate our children in our families from not wait till puberty, but as early as 2, as early as 7, as early as 10, around body image, body safety, body awareness. And so I'm not going to deep dive into that today, but if you go back on, and you can look at my podcast, I can put the link in. I just did these talks. It's called Asking Why with Clint Davis. It's on iTunes, it's on YouTube. And I walk parents through how to protect their kids from social media, how to protect their children from sexual abuse and sexual neglect. Because the stats show that 1 in 3 women have been sexually abused by 18 and 1 in 5 men. And so that's an incredibly high statistic. And I think we have to recognize that we live in a culture of all of us who are at work. We're trying to deal with our families. We're trying to deal with our lives, but we're in pain and we've never dealt with it. And now the internet has allowed us to have 2 very addictive things that are completely dopamine, which we'll talk about in a second, that just feed our pain. And so we're unrecovered from our own traumas, and we're being hyperly sexualized by social media and by pornography, and we don't even know that there's overlap. And so here's an image of what I want to talk to you a little bit today about your own self-control, but maybe why your coworkers don't have self-control. So our brain works off of 2 neurochemicals that are important, well, a lot, but these 2 that we're going to talk about, dopamine and serotonin. So dopamine is triggered by acts of short-term pleasure. So that pushing that Facebook button, hitting that Instagram button, going to LinkedIn and looking at somebody's page, and it touches 5 brain receptors. It's very addictive, and you always want more, which means you feel that high, and then you get a lull, and then you got to go click it again. You feel that high. That's why Facebook and social media and Instagram have the scroll and have the swipe. That's a common theme in all of them, because it's 8 seconds of a hit and then you need another, and 8 seconds of a hit and then you need another. And that's why you end up stuck like I did for an hour looking at nonsense, when really I was begging for serotonin. I wanted really strong connective endorphins in my brain to read this book, to take the time. And the thing about serotonin is that it's triggered by acts of long-term satisfaction. So long, slow, so exercising, reading a book, having a long, gentle conversation with someone, eating green vegetables. These are things that release serotonin. And nothing about social media or pornography does that. It's straight dopamine. And so we've built our whole culture around instant gratification. And what that means is dopamine. It means you're getting a drug, and that drug is more addictive than cocaine. And so it can't be just I'll just try not to look at it as much. We have to make some significant lifestyle changes around having it on our phones, having our phones in the house with us. Maybe when we get home, we have a basket or a drawer that we put them in, to where they're out of our sight and out of our earshot, and we're able to disconnect from that dopamine drip and get to the real things of life that give us health, because serotonin is non-addictive. It teaches you to be grateful for what you have, and it touches 14 brain receptors. So when we play with our kids, when we talk with our husbands and wives, when we sit at the dinner table together, these things release the God-given chemicals that are helpful for us to grow and heal, and not the negative dopamine addiction. So, but again, in America, we have to teach ourselves to fight against this lifestyle. We have to use our relationships, right, and connection, real connection, not social media connection, to get serotonin. And we have to be patient with one another as we do this. So let's talk about boundaries a little bit. I think boundaries are what we have to have in order to have self-control around social media at work, around pornography at work. So there's, and we talk about boundaries a lot, but I find that no one can name what they are. So I figured it'd be helpful to kind of list them. So there's really only 3. There's rigid. Rigid means no emotions and just law. So if you set yourself a boundary and say, okay, not going to go on my phone, then no matter what, we have this black and white thinking that, oh man, now I can't go on there ever. And then what happens is we kind of detox and start struggling, and then we kind of deep dive on it. So you see this kind of binge and purge. We're on it, we're off it, we're on it, we're off it. And that's because those boundaries are too rigid. There's no flexibility. There's no acceptance of life and circumstances and things that happen. The other is diffuse boundaries, which are not law, they're just emotions, meaning whatever makes me feel good, whatever is good in the moment, it's fine for me to have everything on my phone, and I'm never going to have any accountability to what I do. But what we want is we want healthy boundaries. We want to maybe still be on social media, still use our phones, but also maybe put it on our laptop and only have those check-ins like we talked about in the beginning. So we want to have a healthy relationship with social media. I don't really believe you can have a healthy relationship with pornography, but some people would argue that. But I think that it's too addictive, and as we'll talk about, the culture is really unhealthy. So I think in our own lives, when we look at this is called the ACEs score. So this is Adverse Childhood Experience Scale. So if we look at our life and we wonder why we're compulsive or why we're out of control, we have to look back at our childhood and realize that maybe we experienced some things or culturally experienced some things that affected our emotional ability to self-regulate. And so the ACEs are physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, and then household dysfunction, mental illness in the family, incarcerated relatives, substance abuse, mother treated violently, or divorce. And so if we look at our own lives and we go, well, what's my ACE score? Well, the higher our ACEs score is, the more likely we are to suffer from lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drug use, missed work, and then a lot of the physical and mental suicide attempts, depression, anxiety. What's interesting is that like I said, in the last 10 years, we've had the smartphones entered the world. So even the ACEs study, which is this amazing long-term study, doesn't take social media and pornography and the smartphone into consideration. So what you don't see on this is on this neglect. If I point, we have physical neglect here and emotional neglect. What should be right here, and there's a space for it, is what I call sexual neglect. And so if you're a parent or you deal with kids, this may be helpful. But sexual neglect, sexual addiction, porn addiction are huge. And what that is as a parent and as adults, not having conversations around pornography, masturbation, safe and unsafe touch, sexual boundaries, menstruation, or sexuality in general. So I say this because the adults in your life and the people in your office and the children in your life, most of us suffer from sexual neglect. When I've spoken in a group as large as 8,000 people, 1,000 people in the room, and I'll say, raise your hand if your parents talk to you about masturbation or pornography or safe touch. And literally like 3 people will raise their hand. And so that's been out of hundreds of talks that I've given. I've never seen more than about 3% of the room raise their hand. And this is important to understand because we've all been through it as adults and our culture's been through it. And now our children are going through it, but we didn't have smartphones when we were kids. We didn't have social media when we were kids. And so there's this huge gap and the consequences are so much more heavy. And so some of the reasons why we are sexually neglected and we continue to do this to ourselves and our children is that we don't know, we're ignorant. We weren't taught this. It's not intentional, but we're not prepared to handle the smartphone at work. We're not prepared to handle the impulse control at work because we were never prepared for it. We're afraid of doing the wrong things, so we don't talk about these things with our friends and with our peers and with our kids. We're ashamed because we haven't recovered from our own stuff. It's avoidance. It's scary and uncomfortable. In my opinion, there's this kind of generational sin, this brokenness that's been passed down generation to generation. There's an absence of healthy sexuality modeled in the home or in our culture. And then this is a big one for all of us. I think as these problems have gotten greater and as we've increased social media, we feel more connected, but we're more disconnected than ever. So we have more access to people. We have more access to information. We have more access to resources than ever before, but we're also the most disconnected culture that's ever been in America. And I think that double bind is us not realizing that when we're chasing that social media high and that dopamine high and that pornography high, or that escapism, because if we can just shut down either one of those talks and input anything that you're doing at work or anything you're doing at home with a device, and it's really just escapism. Because it could be gaming, it could be looking at clothing, it could be the new fishing, thing that's out. But we find ourselves on there for hours and hours and hours, and it's really escaping. It's really disconnecting. And so we look at this as a culture saying, oh man, we're so connected. We know all these people, we have all these resources, and yet none of us are happy. And people are coming into my office across socioeconomic status and struggling with these things. I tell people all the time, you don't see a lot of middle upper class people smoking crack. And that's because it's a socioeconomic problem. It is a low income, low yield, terrible thing that has been put into the low income culture. But with sexuality and social media, the problem is across social constructions and across the world. It's in upper class, middle class, lower class people where they're struggling with addiction to their phone and struggling with addiction to pornography. And it's kind of the great equalizer in a negative way. And then the last couple is changings in culture, sexual freedom versus sexual bondage. We have moved into this idea of that freedom is being able to do whatever you want to, be on your phone as much as you want to, have access to everything you want to. But in reality, it's become a bondage, meaning our phones, right? They were supposed to be these things that helped us better do things at work, do things at home, accentuate the good things about life, but now they're really a prison that we can't get away from. I'll just in case anybody wants to, does anybody have a question at this point? or comment? Okay, I'm going to keep going. I'm assuming that it's helpful then. So let's look at what's really changed. And this is important for us to understand why things have gotten the way that they've gotten. So my grandparents, my grandfather, my dad, and my life have all been very similar. Meaning, when I went to school, I wrote a note. I didn't know what any of my friends were doing when they were at home. I only hung out with 2 or 3 friends. I couldn't text anybody. I didn't have any social media. I couldn't call anyone. I didn't worry about the different parties that were going on because I didn't know they were even happening. And that was the same experience for my dad and my grandfather. So, parents have always said, kids these days, they don't know what they're doing. And then children, teenagers have always said, oh, you don't understand me. You're old. And that's always been kind of somewhat true. But nowadays in 2020, the reality is that our society has changed so drastically in 10 years that we really don't know what's going on. And we don't look at how drastically the sexuality has increased in a negative way. So let's look at that really quick. So here's the sexual access timeline. So from prehistory to 1860s, there were cave drawings, there were public bathhouses, there was always prostitution. Recreational sex was a thing. In 1860 to 1970, so 100 years. So we had thousands of years, then we have this 100-year jump. And all of a sudden we have photographic pornography, porn movies, porn theaters, adult bookstores, bathhouses, and strip clubs. In 1977 to 1990, all of a sudden we got technology started increasing. We had video, VCR, phone sex, softcore on television, adult magazines. From 1990 to 2004, we had all that we've ever had, and then the internet hit. And so we started having websites for pornography and prostitution. I also work for the Hub Urban Ministry, and so I help with human trafficking and prostitution and sex work. And so a lot of this information comes from my experience there in trying to limit trafficking. So we have all these things, these chat rooms. If people remember AOL, when we had that, it was a very big problematic. And then webcams. For the first time ever, we could have these sexual interactions and these relationships with other adults on a screen. And then 2007 hit, and we've kind of covered this a little bit, but this is when everything kind of escalated and it's become a huge problem. So 2007 to 2010, we had this huge increase in sexting and apps and social media and virtual sex, and Google changing their searches, making it available to specify what you like and what you don't like. And then we had these secret apps that teenagers and adults use all the time, like Notes and Calculator and Games, where they'll hide all of their information into these apps and you won't be able to find it. And so my point of pointing this out is to show that for hundreds of years in America and thousands of years in the world, none of these things are a problem. There were problems, but the margin for error was very wide. But nowadays, the margin for error is very, very small. And if we're involved in these things without boundaries, they're going to get us every time. And so we see this cultural shift in the last decade where sexting is very normal. Porn is very normal. Debt is very normal. Divorce is very normal. And I hear people say, I want a normal life. And I tell them all the time, no, you don't. And you don't want a normal marriage. You don't want to be a normal parent, because normal in our culture is very unhealthy. We want to be in the small group. We want to be in the healthy group. And so I challenge you to think about it and change your language from normal to healthy. Because when we look at greater society, it is very, very problematic to be like them. 30% of adults report to having nude videos on their phones. I have this a lot in my office of people sending social media things back and forth, DMing people, Instagram messaging people in private. And then for high schoolers, it's cool to see how many girls that you can have nude photos on your phone of. And so what keeps this happening? What makes sex and tech so problematic for us, whether it's social media or pornography? And those things are access, meaning you can look at it anytime you want to, as quick as you want to, as much as you want to. Affordability, it doesn't cost you anything. There's millions of free porn sites online. And then accountability. No one's holding you accountable. We have individualized so much that it's private, right? I had a couple this morning, we were talking about this, and he said, yeah, every night, we watch movies together. And I said, okay, what's that look like? He's like, well, typically we get a show, we watch it, and I sit in one chair, she sits in another chair, and I look at the news, and she usually looks at something on Etsy, and we watch the show together. And so I had this conversation, like, you're not watching the show together. You're not really together at all. You're on totally different worlds and totally different wavelengths while trying to connect. And it's because there's such individuality with the smartphone and with devices that we don't even realize that we're disconnected when we are, because we're getting that dopamine drip. So we feel high, we feel like we're having some time together, but we're missing out on all the intimacy and real connection that, let's say, serotonin would afford us. So again, like I read in the beginning, workplace pornography and social media is super normal. We've yet to, as business owners, I know at our practice, for example, one of our therapists is kind of in charge of our Google internet. And so you can put a block on the modem where they can't access anything. You can put timers on people's phones where they can't access anything. But the weird thing that we're in right now is like our phone, this thing that's right beside me right now is our privacy. And it's like, oh, well, you can't touch that because that's mine. But it's like our productivity at work, if those stats are true, which I know they are, people are spending huge amounts of time online, on social media, on Facebook. I hear all the time, and I've seen it, where in the middle of the day, I see somebody post something or like something or follow something, and I know they're at work. And so as a business owner, that time is now being spent on entertainment for you as a staff member, or you're paying someone else to be on your staff, and they're doing something that would be only entertaining 10 years ago at their home, that they could only watch a movie or a video or read a book or a story at home after work. And now they can do it all day. We were laughing before you guys came on here, because it's like, now we have this whole Zoom world where people think, oh, it's great, it's super convenient. But it's like, unless you're sharing your screen like I am right now, people can be looking at whatever they want to. They can minimize and shut down. And I mean, I've been at stuff with my kids where I'm talking to somebody and they're like, yeah, I'm on a Zoom call right now for this meeting. And they show me, and they got slides going like right now. And, nobody's listening. They're just walking around with their kids, or they're at a party, or they're at this event, and yet they're supposed to be working. And so I think we need to realize that that's going to be, we don't need to normalize that and make that okay. A lot of businesses are saying, oh, well, this is more convenient and more efficient. Let's just keep people working from home. But we forget that real human connection and real human interaction is what we really need. So if you have a business meeting at, let's say, Rhino Coffee here in Shreveport, you may run into somebody from church. You may run into somebody from your past or your present. And that makes all these connections, which really, again, that's a harp on it, but like alleviates serotonin, gives you serotonin. It makes your body and your brain heal and get better. But when we're at home and we're doing everything through the digital media, it's all just dopamine and all just, blue light. And it's horrible for us. And we know that changes our neurology and our neuropathways. I've said this before, it's more addictive than a hit of cocaine. We talked about the timeline. And then the other is just, we're just these never ending social interactions where you're measuring your life against everybody else's highlight reel. So especially for women, I think this is why self-harm has increased so much for teens. We're looking at other people through a faulty system. We are at home in our pajamas with our zits and our hair not done, feeling overweight because we ate ice cream last night or we ate a terrible breakfast. We get online and everybody else is presenting their best self. They've got a six-pack, they've got edited photos, they've got white teeth, they look really attractive and they're having the best time ever. And here we are sitting at our house, not doing the best that we could be doing. And the problem is that we all know that that's not real. One of my least favorite things is the whole filtering thing. And I find it hilarious, especially on Facebook, when people have their profile picture, an edited, very highly filtered photo, and then their banner picture is just like a regular picture of them. And it's like, who are you fooling? Like, you know, your pictures are juxtaposition right above and below each other. In one, you kind of look like a squirrel and like a little animal, and the other, you look like a normal human being. And yet we're so desensitized to the whole process that people just continue to do it as if they're tricking each other. And it just makes everything bad because we're measuring against fake lives. Google and Android, right? They don't let their children or their families use these devices. We don't know how to use them. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. And in my opinion, giving teenagers access to this is a lot like giving them the keys to your car and letting them drink a fifth of vodka and drive. You know, they're going to get in trouble. They're going to get in a wreck. So just a little bit of consequences for social media and gaming. And when I mean gaming, it could be just on your phone, or it could be, you know, PS4. I mean, a lot of adults do this too while they're at work. Cyberbullying, you know, I mean, even as adults, man, I mean, it's crazy right now. If you post something political, or you post something emotional, or you post something of an opinion, how quickly you can be canceled, how quickly you can be shot down, how the vitriol that comes out on Twitter. It's just insane. And all we do is find depression and anxiety around that. And it's not bullying as if high schoolers, but man, adults do it just as badly. Again, we talked about measuring our life versus someone else's edited highlights. The dopamine that comes from people liking your pictures. One of the things that's very popular in teenagers and young adults is revenge porn. So they'll have sex with even a spouse or a coworker or a friend, and then they'll put it online. And that's something that's very common that we never happened before in society. Online predators, of people catfishing us in relationships, of pretending to be adults or pretending to be somebody they're not. Hypersexualized material that's viewed by adults privately. So TikTok, Snapchat, all these apps that people use at work where they can hide whatever it is they're doing. So affairs have really increased, you know, terrible situations in marriages, infidelity, instant messenger with adults from around the world. So this is really particularly for teenagers, but like for the first time in human history, your teenager or your spouse can be sitting next to you talking privately with an adult somewhere else that no one knows. And we don't even know that. And so if there's no accountability or filtering or conversation, man, the problems that I'm seeing that bring into homes and households are extreme. And then lastly, sleep deprivation and hypernarcissism. So what I mean by that is everything about social media and the internet is all about us. It's all about projecting our image out into the world and making it look as pretty and as great and as happy as possible, while at the same time making everybody else miserable because they're not looking at themselves in the same way. And then sleep deprivation, man, if I give you any advice, it's don't be on your phone an hour before you go to bed. And unfortunately, it's like our number one thing. The last thing we do is check our social media or our phone. And the first thing we do when we get up in the morning is check our phone. And what that's doing to our brains and our stimulus and our irritability and our addiction impulses, it's like putting steroids into that situation. Okay, I'm going to open up for questions around this again. Amy.
Oh, I was just going to say, so I have a kindergartner, and then I have my stepson is a freshman. And so he's going to be a freshman now. He's eighth grade, just finished eighth grade. And so I think it's really tricky. Like we try to supersede some of these things. Like we got him a phone, so we got the Gab phone.
Yeah.
To try and limit, and we talk about these things and help him understand. I'm a certified child life specialist too, so that has given me a little bit of background and exposure to be able to understand kind of fundamentally the value of all of this. But talk about seeing all this, in a packaged presentation, like my anxiety is going up because it's like, even though you feel like I've done this or this or this, there's just so much more opportunity to continue. Because it is, as I laughed and put in the comment, I consider normal as setting on the washing machine. like there's no such thing. But but at the same time, it's like that kind of weird is wonderful. Like it's okay to not be the typical person, because the typical is going to be right in with all of these things. But I think it is where you look for, how can I find support and like-minded individuals? Because it's not that you need somebody telling you, oh, you're not crazy or any of that, but it's also good to have sound advice from somebody to say, these are good things that you can do, or have you tried that? Because I feel like, you know, it's confronting it and saying, or people say, oh yeah, I need to get off my phone. Okay, no, seriously, how are we going to do this? What is a tangible thing that we can do? What is a tangible thing that we can do for our children who are of elementary school age or of high school age? What's a tangible thing that we can do in our marriages? And so I think it's trying to find authentic people who are also willing to have the courage to face these tough conversations, to say, like, we can do something. And I realize that that's all a whole lot of personal, but I mean, I think that is just kind of
great
to shape the culture that we have, which we can then permeate into the workplace, because we also know that that's of critical importance.
Absolutely.
Sitting up here while you're talking.
Yeah, I know. This has been my feedback every time I do these talks, so I get it. Part of what I'm trying to do is not, I mean, I'm going to give you some what to do here in about 5 minutes, but is to disrupt, because what I found is that we think we know the problem. And then when I do these talks, people realize like they only have a little toe in what the problem is and how far removed we are from dealing with it, especially in our children. And Michael, you asked a couple questions. Any evidence of this stuff leveling off or turning around? Absolutely not. And then, it is getting worse. All this is still on the rise. And then the hyper narcissism. Yeah, I mean, it is the way of the future. It doesn't have to be so this is what I'd say. This is what I'd say is that where hope is that you guys now, I mean, you're the two people on here. So you now know what the problem is, and you know you're going to know how to fix it. And so we have to, in our spheres of influence, we have to be communicating and attacking this differently. And especially Amy, so for me, I have a 6.5 and a 3.5-year-old. So when I have a babysitter come over, I have a sheet of paper that says body safety rules. And it says who can touch them and who can't, that we don't take clothes off and we don't do baths, that, no one touches our private parts, that we don't keep secrets. And my kids know these rules. And I hand that to the babysitter. And my kids know who can touch their private parts and who can't. They know what to call it. So I beg you, go listen to our podcast that I just did on all that, because, we're talking about adults and teens, but the prevention for 0 to 10-year-old parents is what we really need to dive into. And I know that's not what this talk is about, so I don't want to jump into it. But again, all this social media and pornography use, that's all just a symptom of a root problem. And I'm being asked to talk about the symptoms a little bit today, but there's more resources and information. I put all the books, all the podcasts, all the apps, all of those resources on that YouTube channel and on that podcast for parents to get. I put it out for the YMCA to use. So please use those resources, because I think we can really make a change, but we're going to have to deal with, parents of this next generation coming up. They're going to have a community of people who are all saying, hey, we're not going to give our kids phones, and we're not going to let them have social media, and we're not going to let them do sleepovers. We're going to find ways to do culture differently, because look at how much of a mess these teenagers and adults that we're leaving our kids around are. So that's just a little segue or tangent for that. So let me click through this really quick, and I'll get to kind of what to do. This is just another instance of crisis, but the leading buyer of Viagra is 20 to 25-year-old men, because for the last 10 years, they've been watching porn every day and they can't get an erection with a real woman. And so and my point of saying that is that we're just now seeing extremely, extremely bad consequences that are going to carry us into the next 10 years if we don't do anything about this, if we don't protect, if we don't educate, and if we don't change this system around social media and around pornography. And that's all, again, both of those two things are only accessible through the smartphone. And so and again, there isn't any really real practical advice of how do I manage this thing well, because you can't. like there's no one who can have it on their phone and manage it well unless they have killed the access, meaning they only can see it and limit it very less. They have somebody in their life, like their husband or their parent, checking on them and saying, hey, how's your smartphone use? Let me look at your time. Let me check how much you used it yesterday. And luckily now the iPhone and both Android have that, where you can look at where they spent their amount of time, where they spent their energy on that phone. And then you can go, man, I had a teenager yesterday. He's like, man, I'm down to 4 hours a day. And it's like, oh my gosh, like you're on social media for 4 hours. Like, but he was on there for 9. And you go, how do you do it for 9? Well, you do it while you're at school, you do it in the afternoon, and then you spend 3 hours on it at night. And it's insane. So, so I'll give you some parenting rules since we're on that tangent, but you can do text forwarding where your kid, all their text messages that they send come to your phone. You can do daily check-ins. We have weekly conversations around what was sent and what your kid received. Time limits for gaming and social media. So what can we do? Limit our access. And I know we're running out of time. I want to stay on track. Increase accountability. So monitoring, mentors, counseling. And then for all of us, make us work for it. Like earn it. Put that social media on your computer and only go to it whenever you've done your work or you've gotten a certain amount of time done or you've set aside that time to make it worth it. And then it's limited because you only have 30 minutes to be on there and you have something next scheduled. And so you can't just veg out for an hour and a half and miss work or your exercise or your workout or your, whatever it is. Build that community around yourself where you have people and others who are pouring into your life and holding you accountable and checking in on that thing. And I think that goes back to just all of us being honest with how out of control we are with it. And again, I know I'm a therapist, but I think social media, pornography, these are things that are drugs, and just as much as cocaine, just as much as anything else. And if we don't take a hard look at that and realize, what am I trying to escape? What am I trying to numb from? Why am I using these things so much to be not in my body and not connected with people? That's going to take some therapy and some work.
So Michael had a question. It says, do you see any policy changes soon or legislation? For example, they outlawed Happy Meals at McDonald's. Can you do something similar for social media?
Yeah, they're working on that right now, Michael. That was the big thing with them pulling Zuckerberg in, and to be complete, if you haven't seen The Social Dilemma, please go watch that. But it's on Netflix. But one of the things is that the real reality of social media is that we are not the consumers. We are the product, and we are being used for marketing, for resources. Our information is being used for marketing and resources. Our private information is being shared. And yeah, that's a big fight right now, man, on how are we going to change that? Because that you would never let a company do that, but social media can do it because we click this little button that says accept all of the stuff that we don't want to read, and now they have access to our microphone and our camera. Y'all have all had that experience, but like I had a client come in and he had a particular pair of shoes on that I'd never seen. And I thought to myself, that logo's interesting. I've never seen that. And he left. We didn't talk about the shoes. We didn't say anything about the shoes. And on Facebook, I had an ad for those shoes on my Facebook. And it's because his phone came in an interaction with my phone, and he had bought those things on it. It's all so messed up how easily all that stuff gets shared and connected. So yeah, I think one is don't use it as much and have self-control. That's one way to beat it. And the other is, people are pushing for policy, but it's such a constitutional.
Well, it was interesting.
Right now.
There was an effort by Facebook to have Instagram for kids recently, and there was a huge pushback. I think there were 40 attorneys general that wrote letters pushing back on that. And so I think there's a growing recognition in the policy space that some kind of guardrails need to be put in place. And whether it's the Section 230 legislation that's about the ability for platforms to be, content agnostic or what have you. So I think there's definitely a heightened awareness. It will be interesting to see, as you point out, whether there's any traction there.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, so I think we're just now recognizing it. And what I'm pointing out is that we can't make subtle changes in our lives. We have to make drastic changes in our lives with time, with energy, with focus, because the idea that it's like a beer where you can not go to the bar or you can, buy 3 or drink 1, that's not how social media and pornography work. They're too strong. They're too addictive. They're too manipulative, and we're going to lose every time. And so if we have workplaces set up where people can have access to Facebook, they're going to spend hours on social media while also working. And we do not do 2 things well at one time. I don't care what anybody says. I think women tend brain-wise to do that better from what the research shows, but because of the dopamine and the addictiveness of it and the relationalness of it, man, it's just not working. So here's some apps that you guys can use. Bark, Net Nanny, Disney Circle, Google Wi-Fi Family Time, Covenant Eyes, and Screen Time for iPhone. So some of these work on the modem at the office or at your house, and some of these work directly on your phone to literally lock your phone down, watch your time, watch your filtering, help manage what you can't manage yourself. And I'll send these slides out if you guys want them.
That'd be great.
So that way you don't have to, frantically write the slides down. And then these are a bunch of books for parenting.
Is it wrong that I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of that slide?
No, that's fine. No, I didn't give a caveat at the beginning. I didn't give a caveat at the beginning. So no, because I want these resources to go out to whoever. And then this is just a lot of research and great resources for pornography addiction in general. I know that's all the time I got. I blew through that stuff, but any questions or comments?
So Michael, I had a question. What's the best age to build healthy habits?
Okay, so dopamine leads to more clicks, and more clicks then lead to more profit. Tough battle. Yeah, you're right, man. That's the whole point that I'm trying to push with people, is to understand that the things that get the most clicks are usually the most unhealthy for you. So and look at us, right now we're even doing this talk. Out of all the business people, right, you guys showed up to hear it, but it's not appealing to people because they don't want to change their habits. They don't want to figure out how to give up this stuff. They don't want to hear how not to be on social media during the work week because they want to be on it. And so what's the best age to build healthy habits? I mean, right out of the gate, I do not think that kids and teenagers need social media. And well, they don't need social media, in my opinion, until they can drive. Because that means they've grown, maturely enough for you to trust them with a 1-ton vehicle driving around unsupervised. Then I think maybe they're mature enough to handle private conversations with other teenagers at a level of neurology that's insane. I don't think kids need any phones that are not 100% monitored. So, my stance on privacy is that if they live in your home, or a child lives in your home, then the only privacy they should have is in a journal in their room. Because if they're texting someone or emailing someone, it's already public information. And so why would everybody have access to their information but you as a parent? And so that's just a little piece of advice I give, because I think what I've seen in the last 5 years is parents telling me, well, I can't take their social media and I can't take their phone and I can't limit their access to this. And it's like, when did we become a country where now parents are not in charge of what their kids are having access to? And so, yeah, I would say limiting their exposure to that, limiting their exposures to screen time, but also on the flip side, educating them, talking to them about their bodies, talking to them about culture, talking to them about boundaries as early as possible. Now, obviously, the conversation between a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old are going to be drastically different. But you don't wait until 12. You start having those conversations very early. I talk to my sons all the time about instant gratification and how some of the best things in life mean that you have to defer your reward. You have to learn, we have to teach people and ourselves to kind of not get the instant thing that's less than, but put that off and wait till the bigger thing. because, anything, whether it's diet or exercise or mental health, it takes time to get to the good thing. Sure, you could go have surgery, right? And you could get that instant gratification, but that comes with a lot of complications and a lot of money. And so, yeah, I would just say start as early as possible building those healthy habits. And healthy habits that means literal and neurological pathways that give you unconscious and automatic responses. And so you're either building negative ones or you're building positive ones. You're either building resiliency into your brain or you're building dependence, and there's no in between.
All right, well, that's a good place to stop. So thank you very much. Thank you guys, Amy and Michael, for joining us. Clint, thank you so much for your, for your wisdom and for sharing all that great information with us. We really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to talking with you all later. Thanks again.
All right.
Well, the resources, did you say you were going to email those to us?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. If you email them to me, I'll get them out to Amy.
Absolutely. Yeah. I see that last comment, Michael. You're right. With COVID, putting them all online for school, man, it makes this such a drastically difficult task. But I would say this, the resources, we'll email them to you. I'll get them to you. And then, 4-year-old, exactly. And the problem is that it's the answers are very, very simple, right? And go to the podcast and listen to it because it spells all this out in your own time and you can pace it. But do the few things I'm asking you to do, and then all these problems don't happen. But if we don't do the protective measures, then our 4-year-olds, our 7-year-olds, our 12-year-olds, they're going to get eaten up because they don't have the capacity to have self-control.
It's a lot like when cars first came out and there were no stop signs, there were no, which side of the road you drive on. It's about building that infrastructure. And to your earliest point in the podcast, in the webinar, is that we didn't have the time to build those things in at the front end. So it slipped into the culture. It slipped into without the rules and the infrastructure, and frankly, without the adults having experienced it before. It's one of the first technologies where children have had access to it at the same time as adults. Usually new technologies are too expensive or too rare to be able to put out there. But now for the first time, you have them at the same time. So I think we're just now getting to the point where we're learning as a society how to push back and how to create those safer spaces. And I think the ideas and the behaviors that you've outlined are critically important for people to adopt.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. I'm glad it was helpful. I know it's intense, and Amy, I know it's overwhelming. I have 2 little boys myself, but if you do the things that I'm saying, it's very low risk. And I want to say this, I'll say this one thing. The reason is because, especially from the abuse situation for kids, the abusers don't want to get caught. So if we teach our kids the proper language and the proper structure, then the people who are trying to hurt our children will move on to someone. And I hope that I don't want them to hurt anybody, but we can control what our kids know and how they're prepared. So when they meet those things, they have context and they have empowerment instead of being terrified and being shocked.
Indeed. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Clint. We really appreciate it. Amy, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it as well.
Thank you for hosting it.
Take care.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Absolutely, man. If you need something, holler at me. Hope that was helpful.
Oh, that's great. Again, I just, literally we had 17 people signed up. I sent them emails. We've been hounding people to you signed up for the thing, come be a part of it. So, but no, I appreciate you doing it. And, it's really, really great stuff. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. Yeah. I didn't get to do it as concisely as I wanted to because it's
so
blowing through it. And with 2 people there, it's just like, you don't want to just overwhelm just 2 people. I think when there's conversation to be had, then it goes a little better, but
exactly.
Hopefully they'll go listen to the podcast and check it out.
Indeed. Thank you again. And it's great to see you. And you
always
take care. Have a good weekend.
You too, buddy.
Bye now.